everyone. Hope you're doing well. Yes. Today I will be discussing history grade 9. Yes. Like the way you see it here, it's a planning memorandum. So meaning it will help you on how to answer certain questions if they are being asked. All right. So don't mind about this grade 9 teacher. Okay, this is what the teacher should know about. And under here, we have the curriculum coverage, things that you need to cover before the end of the year, because this is term 4. All right. So let's go to our first topic. All right. In history, right, the first one under term 4, we have the turning points in the history of South Africa. All right. So when you look at the turning points in the history, remember in grade 9, we are focusing on history of South Africa. Okay, so we are going to look at the 1960, which is the Sharpeville Massacre and Langa March. Okay, so we're going to see what happened in the Sharpeville Massacre and Langa March. Okay, basically, when you look here, these are summarized here. They are summarized since we are starting our exams in November. So everything is being summarized for you in a summary point. All right. So here it shows you what happened at the Sharpeville Massacre and the Langa March. Okay, we have in March 1696, we have the Sebukwe informs police commissioner that the PAC, the Pan-African Congress, will hold a 5-day peaceful and disciplined protest against the pass laws. Remember in our term 3, we learned about the pass laws, some of the pass laws that were being put in place, right? So these people were holding a peaceful and disciplined protest against the pass laws. Okay, so meaning they were not happy with what was happening. So it was not violent. It was just a peaceful and disciplined protest against those pass laws that were passed. So members of the Pan-African Congress had to leave their passbooks at home on the 21st of March 1960. Okay, and when they left their passbooks, they reported to the nearest police for arrest. Nationwide demonstrations took place. So, in their peaceful and disciplined protests against the pass laws, all the members of the PAC, the Pan-African Congress, they left all their passbooks. Remember passbooks, it was like a passport. All black men in South Africa were expected to carry passbooks wherever they were going. Remember, in those pass laws, we had the Group Areas Act. And with the Group Areas Act, remember, people were put in different areas, okay? Whereby if a black person is found in an area that was designated for the white people without a passbook that states that maybe they're supposed to be working for certain people that side, that person will be arrested. So on that day of the 21st of March, all the members of the Pan-African Congress, they left their passbooks at home and they marched to the nearest police station just to surrender themselves for arrest. All right. That was called the nationwide demonstration. Yeah, it took place. Then on the 21st March 1960, where these Pan-African Congress members went to the police and to the nearest place for the arrest, it was declared as a turning point in the South African history. All right. So that was declared as a turning point in the South African history. So let's look at some of the events that took place that took place in March 21st, 1960. The first event was Soweto. Let's see what happened in Soweto. Okay, Sebukwe and other members marched to Orlando Police Station to surrender for arrest. As the station was approached, most of them, as well as Sebukwe, were arrested and charged with sedition. Yes. So when they marched to the nearby police station, Sebukwe and other members of the Pan-African Congress. They were arrested and they were charged with sedition. Then another event that happened was the Sharpeville. Yes. The Sharpeville was a township in the Val Triangle. Sharpeville Park Branch Chairman Nyakale Solo visited almost every home and bachelor dormitories in the residential area to mobilize support. March 21st, Solo and local leaders led a crowd to Sharpeville police station. They sang freedom songs and shouted slogans. Sharpeville, a township in the Val Triangle, about 5,000 PAC members marched against the pass laws. To Sharpeville police station. Police opened fires on protests. Protesters turned away to flee, but the police kept firing. So there was 180 people that were wounded, 69 were killed, most were shot in the back. That is what happened during the Sharpeville massacre. Another event was Langa. Langa was near Cape Town. There was a march, March 25, Philip Hassani, a regional leader of the PAC, leads a protest march in Langa. The protest began earlier in the morning, but was stopped by Hosanna after police threatened violent actions. After hearing about the Sharpeville massacre, crowds began to march. Police fired on them and two protesters were dead. So, under the Langa, which was a town near Cape Town, two of the people on that day were killed after the police fired bullets on them. And with the Sharpeville, it tells us that 180 were wounded and 69 were killed. Let's look at the consequences of the Sharpeville massacre and Langa march. Langa was a march that took place in a town near Cape Town. We have the short-term consequences of the Sharpeville massacre. Let's look at the short-term consequences. The ANC president by that time was Albert Lutu, and the Professor Zeke Matthews. They called a national day of mourning for the march victims. Stay-away actions on the 28th of March was successful and was also the first national strike in history. Right in the Cape Town on the 30th March 1960, the Pan-African Congress leader Hosanna and Clarence Makwetu led a pack march of more than 30,000 protesters from Langa and Nyanga to the police headquarters in Caledon Square. 30 March, NP, the National Party, declares a state of emergency. On 30 March, the NP, which was the National Party, declared a state of emergency on 30th March. Many leaders of the PAC were arrested and were detained. Let's look at the long-term consequences of the Sharpeville massacre and Langa march. The first one was the captives of Robert Sobukwe. They were imprisoned on Robben Island, isolated from other prisoners and detained for 9 years in a house away from the main prison. Released in 1969, he was placed under a restraining order in Kimberley until he died in 1978. So let's look at the sources. Make use of the sources as well as the knowledge to answer the following questions. So if they ask you to make use of the above sources as well as your knowledge to answer the following questions, it means that you will get the answers from the sources and the knowledge that you've learned about the following. All right. So our first question is, name 3 reasons why Robert Sebukwe and others broke away from the ANC to form the PAC. The answers are given to you there. They state some of the reasons. And then question 2 has got, name 3 things on which the ANC and PAC were still anonymous in 1960. It's given to you. All right. So let's look at question 5, which says, write an essay of about 10 lines about 4 effects that had the events in Sharpeville and Langa on that time, and thereafter on South Africa. What do you think were the most far-reaching consequences? Motivate your answer in a few sentences. Okay, so under that, you have, remember when you're writing an essay, first and foremost, you have your introduction. You introduce the sentence, the topic being given to you. You have your body in an essay, each paragraph. Each paragraph is a point. So, meaning, these are the bullets that you must include in your essay. Meaning, you need to form notes about the national days of mourning, the captive of Robert Sebukwe, beginning of the armed struggle, banishment of ANC and PAC, negative word opinion against South Africa's government, and SA declared a republic, and maybe other relevant what information, meaning all these points are going to form your essay. But in an essay, you don't need to outline. You need to write each point and then you explain everything. And so let's look at what happened under Soweto uprising. And here again to look at the causes, the leaders, events of June 16, events that spread and consequences it had across the country, long-term consequences for resistance and oppression. All right, 16 June, about 10,000 school children from Soweto gathered to protest the exclusive use of Afrikaans as a language of teaching in Black schools. The factors that caused this uprising was the rise of the Black consciousness movement, the organized student activism by SASCO and SASANS, the liberalization of Mozambique and Angola, Bantu education, Afrikaans as a required media of instruction in Black schools. So those are some of the factors that caused the uprising of the Soweto what? Uprising. The introduction of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in Black schools, the Bantu education, the rise of Black consciousness movement, also the liberalization of Mozambique and Angola. All right, so under that, you need to explain some of the factors, right? So let's look at each factor in detail. When you look at the rise of Black consciousness movement, a man that was called Stephen Bantu Biko, he was the father of the Black conscience in South Africa. Biko died in police custody in 1977 at 31 years. He was beaten to death. Right, that was one of the factors that caused the Soweto uprising. One of the factors that caused the events of June 16 was the death of Stephen Bantu Biko, who was the father of the Black consciousness in South Africa. Stephen Biko died in police custody. He was beaten to death at the age of 31. Another factor that caused the Soweto uprising was organized student activism by SASCO, which was the South African Students Organization, and SAMS, which was the South African Students Movement. So, in 1969, South African Students Organization formed when Black university students led by Biko and others broke away from the mainly white National Union of South African Students. The organizers' protests against apartheid and white minority control of university campuses. The South African Students Movement, which is the SASAMS, founded in 1974 to organize learners in schools. The liberation of Mozambique and Angola was also another factor that caused the Soweto uprising, whereby Angola and Mozambique gained independence from Portugal in 1974 and 1975, respectively, bringing hope to Black South Africans, which will also experience freedom. So in Mozambique and Angola were liberated, becoming independent from Portugal in 1974. In 1975, this brought hope to Black South Africans that they will also experience what? Freedom. Then we have also the Bantu education. This was another factor that brought Soweto uprising, whereby they were giving Black children inferior education, meaning Blacks were given inferior education and the whites definitely were given the superior what? Education. This also brought about the causes of the Soweto uprising. Also, Afrikaans being put in Black schools as a medium of instruction was also another cause leading to Soweto uprising. Black students did not want to learn in Afrikaans or speak the language. They considered Afrikaans as a language of the oppressor. So, in that way, they said no to using Afrikaans as a medium of education, a medium of instruction in Black schools. All right. So, the Department of Bantu Education recommended all Black schools in 1975 to offer half of grade 7 and 8 subjects in Afrikaans. So, the Black students did not want to learn in Afrikaans or speak it. So, in that way, they had to protest against the law. We need to look at the leaders of Soweto uprising, right? So the leaders of Soweto uprising are given to you there. You'll have to read through them. Those were heading the Soweto uprising. Let's look at the events of 16 June 1976. We look at the groups of pupils, about 10,000. They gathered outside their schools on the morning of the 16th June 1976. In South Africa, 16th June, every 16th of June, every year, we celebrate Youth Day. This is one of the reasons as to why we always celebrate Youth Day on the 16th of June. It is because of some of the laws that were passed and people had to protest against these laws. Let's look at some of the events that took place on the 16th of June. And here you will understand or get to know why you always celebrate the 16th of June every year in South Africa. Okay. Groups of pupils, about 10,000, they gathered outside their schools on the morning of 16 June 1976 with posters. Remember, this protest was a peaceful protest. They just stood outside with posters, slogans such as "Weg met Afrikaans." Afrikaans is the language of the oppressor, were written on the posters. They burnt out motorbikes, burnt out trucks, blocked the roads, liquor stores, beer halls, and the community centers in Soweto were burnt down. Crowds attacked the offices of the Western Administration Board in Soweto. Police used tear gas, but the people started throwing stones at the police. Then the police started shooting at learners. Hector Pearson, a 13-year-old, is one of the first pupils that were shot by the police. Many were shot dead and injured. So those are some of the events that took place on the 16th of June, 1976. Let's look at the events that followed. The Soweto Uprising. Student uprising spread to other parts of South Africa. Hundreds of protesters died, thousands injured in weeks after June 16. 11 August 1976, 33 people died who were shot dead by police in Langa. Remember, Langa was a town in Cape Town. Mashinini went into exile after June 16 to escape arrest. Passed to London and then to several African countries. Died in 1990 in Guinea in exile. Soweto in 1976, turning point in the battle against apartheid. So Soweto in 1976 was a turning point in battle against apartheid. So we have a source given to you here, which says the rise of the Black consciousness movement. So you read through this source and then use source A and your knowledge and answer the essay questions that follow. All right. So there is guidelines to this essay, and also what you need to include in the essay is given to you here. Also the rubric, because most of the time the essays are marked with the rubric. All right. So we have the long-term effects of resistance and oppression. Okay. So when you look at the opposition to apartheid, remember apartheid, government. It was a government that separated. It was separating people during apartheid. There were only two groups. You either white or non-whites. The whites were the white people that were coming from European countries, the British, and then the blacks, the colored Indians. Those were non-whites. So people were classified into two groups. Either you are white or non-white. So the opposition to apartheid government grew stronger inside and outside South Africa after 1976. Even if the police regained control of the black settlements over time, the apartheid government would never regain full control of black South Africans. About 5,000 young people are fleeing residential areas and in exile, joining liberation movements such as MK and the military wing of the PAC, the Apple Azanian People Liberation Army. They were sent to training camps in Tanzania, Angola, and Mozambique, and later to Eastern Europe in the Soviet Union. Many of them returned a few years later as trained cadres, small groups of trained activists. From MK16 June Division, members of the June 16 Division were responsible for a number of bombings in the country in the later 1970s and 1860s. Trade unions and students begin to play an increasing political role. The Congress of South African Students is formed by students. They organize protest actions by pupils in schools across the country. In the decades that followed, hundreds of thousands of workers, youths, political activists took part in protests, demonstrations to express their anger over the policies and the actions of the apartheid government. We look at the release of Nelson Mandela and banishment of the freedom movement. Okay, so the release of Nelson Mandela was also another turning point in the South African history. About 30 years after Sharpeville in the history of South Africa. However, the outcome was positive. Positive, meaning it led to the ban of the ANC, the PAC, and other banned organizations. were lifted and Mandela was released. When you look at source C, it gives us the tri-cameral parliament. So you read through that source and then see what happened in that source. The source is given to you there, and we also have answers to the source. The first question is, name the 3 chambers of parliament that were established in 1983. The first chamber was the House of Assembly, that was for only the white people. The second chamber was the House of Representatives, that was only the coloreds. And the third chamber was the House of the Delegates, only the Indians. Those are the 3 chambers of parliament that were established in 1983. Why were people who participated in the 3 chambers system called the sellouts, allies, puppets? They were called that because they had no say. Even if they participated, it was seen as pointless to have anything to do with the system. They were therefore seen as part of oppressors and the system that made the rules of apartheid. Okay. And another question states, why do you think 70% of white population voted in favor of the reforms in 1983 referendum? It was an unfair system that harmed most of the people in the country. The economic sanctions caused all people to suffer economically. All right. And our last question is, what was the reaction of people regarding the political developments in 1985? What was the reaction? There were national-wide protests following the political developments. It has strikes, mass marches, children have boycotted schools, etc. Violence broke out during many of the actions. The government's response was to declare a state of emergency that was a place of the most of 1980s. Our next topic is events leading up to the 1994 election. Remember, South Africa became a democracy where everyone who was above the age of 18 could choose for their own leaders as long as they were citizens in 1994. The first democratic meaning the first election where all South Africans that were above the age of 18, all South Africans that were above the age of 18 could vote for their own representatives was in 1994 on the 27th of April. Now we are going to look at some of the events that led to the 1994 election. The first event was domestic resistance and oppression, 1980s. In the early 1980s, unions, townships, civic organizations worked together to fight the oppression of apartheid. Many strikes, protests took place. People demanded political demands and demands for better pay and working conditions. MK and APLA continued to attack targets in South Africa. 20th August 1983, the United Democratic Front is found. So some of this explains why, all this explains why there was elections. The elections took place in 1994. Okay? So, we have foreign pressure on the apartheid regime, 1980s. So, it was also another event leading up to the 1994 election. International economic sanctions against SA, refuses to trade with South Africa. In the US, companies with interests in South Africa, such as Pepsi, IBM, withdrew their investments under pressure from anti-apartheid activists. International sports teams and culture groups did not want anything to do with South Africa. If international matches were played, it was marked by protests. Let's look at this source. Under this source, we have questions that follow the source whereby you need to use your knowledge and answer the questions. The first question is, describe 3 factors that led to the fall of apartheid. The answer is given to you below. There were a number of factors that contributed to the struggle against an eventual abolition of apartheid in the 1990s. There was riots, there was protests, and armed resistance. They played a major role. It was also the inputs of great leaders like Nelson Mandela, who made great contributions. However, there were also many external factors that played a role in the fall of apartheid. The external pressure placed on South Africa was in the form of sports and economic sanctions and isolations in the international community. Right. Let's see. What are the economic sanctions? What are economic sanctions? Let's see what are economic sanctions. Right. Economic sanctions occur when countries refuse to trade with another country. Foreign investments are withdrawn to push the country. That's economic sanctions. So if there is an economic sanction, this happens when other countries refuse to trade with another country or when foreign investments are withdrawn to punish the country. Another question posed is, why do you think there were economic sanctions against South Africa? The answer is clear. Here, the discussions given regarding the apartheid policy of the National Party. Let's look at the end of the Cold War. 1989. Okay, so the Cold War ended in 1989 with the collapse of communist states and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Towards the end of the 1980s, the USA and other Western countries regarded South Africa as an ally in Africa, even though economic sanctions and culture and sports boycotts were still applied. The reason was the communist bloc actively supported the South African regional-based liberation movements such as the ANC, the PAC, ZANU, the Impala, and Frelimo, and the frontline states such as Angola and Mozambique. South Africa was seen as a stronghold against communist expansion in Southern Africa. But when the West was no longer threatened by communism, there was also no reason to maintain the loyalty of the apartheid government. The NP had to choose maintain apartheid and face increasing isolation and sanctions, or implement reforms and enter a new world order. We have the unbanning of political movements, 1919. On the 2nd of February 1990, President F.W. de Klerk announces lifting of ban on ANC, PAC, and other organizations. Start of negotiations between South African liberation movements and the government led by National Party. Let's look at the release of Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners. After removal was announced, the release of Nelson Mandela was expected. A number of Mandela's comrades who were with him in Robben Island have already been released. For example, Govan Mbeki was released in 1988, and Walter Sisulu, Raymond Mhaba, and Elias and Andrew were released in 1989. Nelson Mandela was released on the 11th of February 1990 after 27 years in prison. He walked out as a free man. Land was delighted. A new era has dawned. Let's look at the negotiations and violence. Some of the negotiations that led to the release of Nelson Mandela. Some of the negotiations in violence. The negotiations include Mandela okay. The negotiations include Mandela's release and lifting of the ban on the ANC,